at a certain point you just lose track of where you are, who you are, and what you're doing, because you disrupt people's lives on a daily basis. Just thinking that there were hundreds of thousands of families that couldn't have one peaceful night of sleep in their homes. I mean, who would be willing to live like that? Sitting in your living room and suddenly hearing smashing on the wall, and there is a hole in the wall, and suddenly 20 soldiers come to visit. Most of the missions that my unit was given and carried out were arrest operations, search operations, going into taking over cities or towns or villages, of course in the nighttime, and sometimes you would continue in the same place for a few days, searching, going one house to the other, searching them, taking over houses as observation points, or arresting people. And that's your routine. My routine was, or our routine was, that we never knew where we're going to be from one minute to the other. One night we could be in Nablus, the next night we could be in Gaza, the next night we could be in Hebron. And at a certain point you just lose track of where you are, who you are, and what you're doing, because you disrupt people's lives on a daily basis. And for me, that was the most, I think when I look at it today, when I reflect on it today, as someone who couldn't do that during your service, because you can't really, you live in a, denial way of life where you can't look at what you're doing, you can't really reflect on it. But when I reflect on it today from this perspective, I can say that that was probably for me the deepest example of corruption. Not the extreme cases where there was shooting or stuff like that, but just thinking that there were hundreds of thousands of families that couldn't have one peaceful night of sleep in their homes. I mean, who in today in the USA, in Israel, and anywhere else would be willing to live like that? Not knowing if at 2 o'clock in the morning 20 soldiers will take over your house for a week. Not knowing, sitting in your living room and suddenly hearing smashing on the wall, and there is a hole in the wall, and suddenly 20 soldiers come to visit. And for me that was routine. One time when we finished an operation in Nablus, and it was really destructive. We were 5 or 6 days straight in Nablus with a lot of IDF forces, tanks and APCs, and it was very destructive. I mean, the whole infrastructure of the city was torn up. There was a lot of houses that were either damaged or even destroyed. And there was a lot of shooting, mostly by the IDF, into the city. And when we got out of there, the first thing that happened when we left the city, got back to the army barrack, was I heard a radio news flash, which happens every hour in Israel. And it was going like, IDF forces left Nablus after a search and arrest operation, found this and that. And that's it. And I think that even then, I suddenly realized my parents are now sitting at home, they're listening to the radio, and they're sure that here we are, their heroes, their son, they sent, found weapons and ammunition and did this and that and so important things to defend this country, but they don't know the truth. They don't know that 99% of what we did there was destroy people's property, destroy their lives, but no one told them that. And I think, like Noam, when he just realized what where the truth is and where it's going, today I can say that that was one time that I really started to think of how the reality is being kept, under the surface, hidden from the public. I want to give you one example of something that we've exposed also in the press in Israel and in foreign press a few months ago, about a revenge attack that was launched by the IDF after one night in February 2002, two terrorists from the Islamic Jihad attacked an IDF checkpoint and killed 6 IDF soldiers. The same night, the Chief of Staff, the Minister of Defense, not some sergeant at a checkpoint, this is policy right from the top, decided to launch a revenge raid against Palestinian officers, some of them just traffic officers, all around the West Bank and Gaza. The next day, 15 Palestinian officers were dead, were reported dead. And we spoke with five different soldiers and officers in 2 different units that were part of these raids and part of the attacks on 4 different checkpoints in different areas, geographically had no connection whatsoever to the place that was attacked by the night on the IDF checkpoint. No connection. One was in Nablus, one was near Ramallah, and they just attacked, and the orders were just go there, shoot to kill. And in the briefing by the commanders, by the high-ranking commanders, commanders of units, brigade commanders, they were told that this is revenge. We are going to revenge the blood of our soldiers. So when you ask me where it comes from, this was not some spontaneous 19, 20-year-old kid that lost his mind, that went out of control for a second and slapped someone. This was policy. People sat down in offices, convenient, comfortable offices, and decided to kill people as revenge. And the next day, 15 people were reported dead that had no connection whatsoever to the attack on the IDF. So when we have to, and we exposed this. And then, we weren't expecting something dramatic to change, because when people ask me, don't you think something should happen? Of course I think something should happen. But do you really think that the Israeli public or someone will be brave enough to say that the Minister of Defense has to be investigated? That the Chief of Staff has to be investigated? This is not a 19, 20-year-old or even a lieutenant that should be investigated. This is the system. This is the government. This is the policy. Woke up in the morning and found out that he can't look at himself in the mirror. That guy's name was Zi0nism. Sharon. He's the founder of Breaking the Silence. And he started to talk with his friends, with people that were his soldiers, his commanders, especially about Hebron. He served 14 months in Hebron in the Second Intifada. And that evolved into a exhibition of pictures taken by soldiers, not photographers, not journalists, just pictures that 18, 19-year-olds took for memories. And we took that out of photo albums, presented over 60 of them, with over 60 soldiers giving video testimonies about their Hebron service. And that evolved from there to what it is today, a much bigger group of soldiers that served all around the occupied territories as conscripts or as officers in the Second Intifada. And we've interviewed over 300, mostly discharged, some still in service, soldiers in the IDF. And the message, or what we're trying to do with all this, is when we were discharged, the first thing, the fundamental thing that we all felt was the amazing distance or gap of information between what is really going on in the occupied territories, what we're really doing over there, and what is known back home to our parents, to our neighbors, to our public figures and leaders, what is told by the press, what is told by the IDF. And we felt a moral obligation as much as a social obligation, as people who grew up in Israel, did their military service, who love their country and are very, very concerned about how we will look tomorrow, how we will raise our children tomorrow, because we don't want to see ourselves anywhere else. And out of that concern, we felt the moral obligation of bringing that information, the true stories of what we're doing in the occupied territories, to the public, and raising a true public debate on all platforms. Press, politicians, everywhere you can think of, about the real corruption, the moral corruption that is happening in the occupied territories, the price of sending more and more generations to be occupiers. It's important to understand the two different aspects of, or two different types of testimonies that we've collected until now. In the first few months, most of the testimonies that we exposed were testimonies on the routine daily brutality and individual or group corruption that happens, humiliation, abuse, theft, looting, things that for Israelis mostly, but I think for any person that wants to deny, can say rotten apples, extreme cases, people that broke the law, broke regulations, and should be convicted or prosecuted. And it sometimes doesn't even matter that you tell them, well, these are stories about units, about hundreds or thousands of soldiers. And that was something that we were exposing for a long time. And the last campaign that we did was a massive collection of testimonies on policies, procedures, orders, things that can't be very easily swept under the rug and called rotten apples, because they are the system. And the main issue that we were addressing in this campaign were the rules of engagement. The rules of engagement in Israel are classified. In this intifada are not even written down, even though in past times the IDF used to issue or distribute pocketbooks with the rules of engagement in the occupied territories to every conscript and reservist. In this intifada, not only didn't they distribute this, it is all passed down orally. There is no document written down that is passed down to the officers in the field or the soldiers. And we have decided that, especially because the most dominant thing or dramatic thing that has happened in the second intifada is the casualties, is that people are being killed, and children, regular people, innocent people are being killed, and it has been much more violent on both sides, both on the Israeli side with the suicide bombers, and both on the Palestinian side with all the actions that are being done by the IDF. And we've exposed a massive collection of those. I think for me the one that sticks out the most is an officer from an elite unit telling us about his experiences in Rafah. And his testimony is very, very long, so I won't say it all, but he talks about two main issues. One is the demolition of houses, and he describes how in the briefing they were told that the procedure is you don't go into Rafah on foot, because it was right after the APCs blew up. If you remember, that was in the summer of 2004, and it was very hectic, and you couldn't walk by foot, so you come with APCs, tanks, and bulldozers. D9 Caterpillar bulldozers, giant monsters. And before you even say something to the family that you're going to take their house, before you do anything, the D9, the bulldozer, digs 8 meter deep ditch surrounding 360 degrees, surrounding the house. Then he punches a hole. You don't say anything to the family, you just punch a hole into one of the walls, and then the APC comes right up to the family's home, and you lower the ramp and the soldiers go in. And I was asking him, who's deciding which houses? And then he describes to me how they demolish, how they destroy every house in that area that bothers their observation, that might be threatening, everything. And I ask him, who decides what to destroy? And he says, well, the officers in the field. And you have to understand, these could be lieutenants, 21-year-old lieutenants, decide what to destroy and what not to destroy. And then when I ask him, and no one told you criterias of what you can and what you can't, I mean, if the officer decides that he doesn't like, I don't know, a yellow house, and the house is yellow, exactly the words that I used. And he says, well, if he doesn't like yellow, he can destroy it. And it's that easy. And I think for me, that was an amazing, it's still something that I carry every day, because it's exactly how the procedures, how the policy are so corrupt from the start, that when they are carried out in the field, the amazing power that you have as a 19, 20-year-old soldier carrying out these policies, these procedures on the field, are just so tragic, or are disastrous.